This is a border that separates China from China. On one side is Shenzhen, and on the other side is Hong Kong, a special administrative region of China. When you cross the border, you're in a whole different world. Gone are the neon lights, the fusion of British and Chinese culture, and websites such as Facebook, Google, and Twitter, as they are replaced with Baidu, Weibo, and an increased government presence. But that isn't even the most fascinating thing about this border, which is that this border between Hong Kong and the rest of mainland China has an expiration date. About 2 weeks ago was the 31st anniversary of the day that nothing happened, June 4th, 1989.
It was late at night in Beijing, this morning our time, when a divided leadership of the Communist Party finally decided it had had enough.
2 weeks ago, people in Hong Kong held a vigil for the Tiananmen Square massacre, which was the climax in the largest protest China had ever seen. People all over the country gathered to protest in support of democracy, but instead of reform, the Chinese Communist Party fired on these protesters, marking the end to any form of large democracy movement in mainland China. And ever since 1989, the people of Hong Kong are honoring their sacrifice. Over the years, this vigil has gained even more significance, with China's ever-increasing encroachment on Hong Kong's freedom. And as 2047, the end of one country, two systems draws closer, China is taking the initiative to exert more of its influence over Hong Kong. So how do we get here? It's the late 1700s and Britain was a big fan of tea, and luckily, China's selling a lot of it. Great, except China would only take pure silver in exchange for tea. Britain didn't care, they just wanted the tea. Britain was like, yo, thanks for the tea, man, and China was like, no problem, bro, and everything worked out, except it didn't. During this time, Britain was running out of silver to trade China, so Britain came up with a plan to sell opium to China and use the profits from the opium to buy tea, and thus started the first major drug operation in history. China obviously didn't like what Britain was doing, so in 1839, China seized 20,000 chests of opium and dumped it into the ocean. Britain then was like, hey yo, China, not cool bro, and then declared war against China. By 1898, after 2 opium wars, Britain acquired Hong Kong Island and the Kowloon region through a lease on those territories for 99 years, which was as good as forever, according to the British diplomat who made the deal. Britain rapidly developed Hong Kong from a small fishing village into a major trading hub, and as China underwent its communist revolution, Hong Kong was prospering. But 99 years wasn't forever, and eventually Britain had to give Hong Kong back to China. Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping negotiated that Hong Kong would be given back to China under the condition that China would keep its hands off Hong Kong for 50 years. This agreement was called One Country, Two Systems, and for the first 10 years, China respected Hong Kong's independence. Back in 1993, Hong Kong's GDP was more than a quarter of China's entire GDP, and China believed that it would be in their best interest to respect Hong Kong's autonomy because of the mass disparity of wealth between them. But since then, China has experienced massive economic growth. Take a look at the amount of growth in 5 Chinese megacities, Shanghai, Chongqing, Chengdu, Shenzhen, and Beijing, since the late 1980s. These Chinese megacities fueled China's rapid economic growth, overtaking Hong Kong in productivity. By 2018, Hong Kong only accounted for 2.7% of China's GDP, and this explains China's changing attitude towards Hong Kong. Because Hong Kong's economy is not as important as it once was, the Chinese government has less of an incentive to respect Hong Kong's autonomy, and this has resulted in China trying to exert more influence over Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government has been encouraging schools to teach children about the Chinese Communist Party with a textbook that is essentially propaganda. China is building infrastructure to connect Hong Kong with mainland China, such as this bridge here that was finished recently, and even some people were abducted by the Chinese government for selling banned books. But in 2014, China took it one step too far. When China tried to meddle in Hong Kong's elections, the city erupted into protests. This movement was known as the Umbrella Revolution because of the usage of umbrellas by the protesters to block pepper spray and tear gas. So many people attended these protests because Hong Kong's democratically elected government that China promised not to touch in the One Country, Two Systems agreement was being threatened. And these protests led to a political awakening in Hong Kong, as it was the first time where the middle class actively participated in government. In March 2019, an extradition bill sparked another huge wave of protests in Hong Kong. This wave of protests began with a murder case in Taiwan. The defendant of this murder case couldn't be tried in Taiwan because he was a Hong Kong resident, so an extradition bill was proposed that would allow defendants to be extradited to Taiwan and mainland China. Opponents of this bill argued that it would allow the Chinese Communist Party to try Hong Kongers in mainland China for petty crimes. In September 2019, after months of protest, the extradition bill was withdrawn, but the protest had already morphed into a larger democracy movement, and this movement is still going today. Just 2 weeks ago, Hong Kong held their annual Tiananmen Square Vigil, even though public gatherings were banned because of COVID-19. These protests symbolize a desire for Hong Kong to retain their way of life, their freedom, and their democratic process in a time with ever-increasing influence from Beijing. These protests are a symbol of Hong Kong's struggle against authoritarianism and single-party rule. And 30 years ago, this exact same struggle happened 2,000 kilometers away in Beijing, and Hong Kong doesn't have much time left. Only 27 years remain until the last vestiges of freedom in Hong Kong are stripped away. So why are the people in Hong Kong fighting a losing battle? Perhaps it's the least they can do to preserve their freedom before the countdown hits 0. You know what? I probably shouldn't have made this video because if Chinese immigration finds out I made this, they probably wouldn't let me into their country. And that's a huge problem because I have a lot of family still in China. Oh well, too late now, I guess.